All right, so let's get started. So greetings, everybody. My name is Mike Atkin. I am the director of the Enterprise Knowledge Graph Foundation. I also work at a knowledge graph consulting firm called Agnos.ai in London. So on Monday, we organized 2 sessions focusing on the business and implementation issues kind of affecting knowledge graph adoption, right? We had various viewpoints. We had participants from Accenture and from AstraZeneca, UBS, Capital One, Johnson & Johnson, a fashion knowledge graph called Zalando, and a fintech in financial services called Noonan. And we organized a session around a hypothesis. So let me give you that hypothesis, and we'll start with that, and then we'll get into it. So from my perspective, the knowledge graph equation kind of starts with the recognition that we have data incongruence. It's a liability, it's a real problem, and most people are recognizing that problem as being something to address. We know the problem is solvable. We also know that it's easier to solve this problem semantically than it is using conventional technology, right? We know that making the leap from columns to concepts is achievable, but it's certainly not automatic. And we also know that leadership is required because there's organizational inertia that you have to overcome for any new thing that's introduced into an organization. So the community of knowledge graph practitioners, we are completely enamored with, of course, with the potential of knowledge graph because of all the capability provided by semantic standards, right? We know that subject matter expertise knowledge can be modeled. It can be modeled precisely. We can express that in a standard way. We can achieve unambiguous shared meaning, which is always our goal, right? The fact that we can solve it is a compelling story. And I'm going to say it's an overwhelmingly compelling story. So our goal was to look at what's required to expedite adoption and where are we in that curve and what do we need to do to continue this movement along that pathway. So this is going to be a summary of what we learned, maybe a bit of extra analysis thrown in if we feel compelled. And to help me do that are 2 people. So Teresa Tung from Accenture and Lauren Alquier from Johnson & Johnson. I'll let you guys introduce yourself and then we'll get into it. So Teresa, let's start with you.
Hi, this is Teresa Tung. I'm a managing director at Accenture. I'm the chief technologist within our Cloud First business. And I've been working with enterprise knowledge graphs over the past 8 years, and most recently have been doing a lot more work bringing it out of pilot into something that's more organized across our business.
Terrific. Lauren?
And I'm Laurent Alquier. I'm part of a small team in Johnson & Johnson around enterprise IT, working on evaluating emerging technologies. And I've been working with semantic technologies for the past 12 years, mostly first as a side project, and then more recently as a more significant part of my work. And we're very early on that journey around the knowledge graphs.
All right, so Teresa, you've agreed to be my first victim. We're going to talk about the business side of the equation. And I think there were like 4 big topics that occurred in the conversation. The first one was about cognition, right? It was about, do stakeholders really get the joke? Do they understand the data incongruence problem at a level that's going to lead us into this type of solution? What do you think what do we learn from that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the biggest changes, right? So I think the data incongruence problem, it's always been a problem, and people have thought of it as, you know, it's a manual step. We have to deal with it. It's par for course. And I think the change is that the business stakeholders are not only recognizing the challenge as an important thing to solve, but as an opportunity. The need to be data-centric is going to be how they are going to compete, right? So our oil and gas clients, the way they pull oil from the ground and refine it and deliver it, those processes are well known, right? They're not going to actually compete upon how they do that. How they're going to compete is they're becoming a data-driven business. And to do that, the enterprise knowledge graph is really what's needed to really bring the smarts, bring the agility. And these business people are very savvy, right? They experience the impact of enterprise knowledge graphs in their consumer lives, right? So when they do web searches on online, when they're interfacing with the chatbot, when they're online shopping. So they do wonder, why can't we bring some of those experiences to how their business, right?
I was really taken by that concept of data centricity. You know, that was like, I think throughout all the conversations, we kind of got the sense that people are putting data first as opposed to technology first. That's a pretty huge shift, don't you think?
It is, and I think it's part of it is because of that intelligence, right? That data-driven business to power things like AI. And even with the pandemic, I would say that it's not so much just AI. It's knowing data real time, seeing seeing the view you want to see about the business. When something changed, it's not about projecting a year from now. That's important too. But what's happening now, and what can I do about it now? And the now for me in the context might be different from a different part of the business. And so having that view and seeing your actions and the impact of the actions of others, even in real time, and seeing this from the same single source of truth, but the view that you want to see, is that data centricity.
You know, so we can maybe check a box and say that generally the stakeholders at the, in charge of business and organization do understand this problem and are kind of viewing it in the right way. So that's I think, progress for our industry. The second topic, kind of in my opinion, was really about maturity, right? And we kind of framed it saying, let's look at 3 levels of maturity. We have a maturity model we've been working on, and kind of just to frame that real quickly. We have level 1, which is experiments, POCs. You're building your own specialist team, and you're doing a project, right? Somebody's willing to pay for it, but you're doing a project. Level 2, that's where it starts to become extensible. We've got shared ontologies. We're beginning to build a center of excellence. And then level 3, when we extend it out to the enterprise, kind of as a platform for the organization. So I was pretty impressed that the industry has made a leap from experiments almost to the enterprise level. What did you hear in this, Teresa?
Yeah, I heard very similar. I'm sure part of the reason we were panelists was because we had experience in the topic, but all the panelists were, moving out of level 1. So within their organizations, they had pockets where people had already experimented with knowledge graphs and have proven the value for knowledge graph powered applications. So this might be within a line of business or within a particular use case. And people were looking towards, again, maturing to that level 2, right? So how do you connect and across the different parts of the business that are knowledge graph savvy or have a need for knowledge graphs, and figuring out, how do I make this applicable for my business? How do I make this enterprise ready? And I think one of the key takeaways from the panel was that you really need to band together. Because when you're in level 1, you can have a strong business champion. That's what you need, right? You need a business champion with the funding, with the team, with the use case, and the channel to make a difference for your business. But then as you move to level 2, so that this doesn't become a POC and stalls there, but actually changes the way you manage your data. Now that banding together is actually not that lone champion, but a federated coalition across the business that is going to agree upon certain things. And some of the things we're doing is agreeing upon even the graph database or even the query interface, Gremlin, GraphQL, right? So how do we work with cloud? Do we use the cloud graph offerings, or do we do something that is more migratable, right? So all these questions as you band together is going to help you have, power numbers.
Very, very significant, right? Because previously, in terms of sustainability, if you have to rely on a single champion, and that champion moves on, your whole project's at risk. And I think it kind of got a sense that, as you just said, we kind of are moving beyond the need for a sole skirt to hide behind, if you will.
Yes.
I was also pretty impressed that, I guess the general sense was, we've moved out of the academic realm and now into the applications realm. And that's also a big leap, I think, that has occurred. I think the third topic that I heard was really about the driving use cases. And, you know, maybe I can frame that a little bit for you, because I hear two sides. There's a control type of activity, resiliency and organizational management, and there's a business function, you know, applications that are designed for revenue and customer service. What do you see right now as the driving applications for Knowledge Graph?
So it seemed across the board that we saw data as the driving application. So data in a lot of ways that serves some of that function, right? So data and then inventory of data, like a new sort of data management. So going beyond your data glossaries to something that actually manages the information and makes that data reusable. It's the data integration and using a knowledge graph to make it easy to both stitch together data from others and to reuse that, right? So you're not doing it time and time again, but you could actually add the right quality rules and really manage and connect the lineage of your data supply chains. And then your flexible query. And this does lead into the app, but it wasn't driven necessarily by the app itself. It's not saying we're going to have a chatbot and that's the killer app, or customer service recommendations as a killer app. The flexible query that actually is going to change a business process, right? So if you imagine the way that you might do even manufacturing today, right? Like you would want to be able to see right away all the data that you have as to what's manufacturable within your supply chain. And a lot of what is needed is dependent upon context. So to be able to have a flexible query that a business analyst or user could actually find, that's going to power a new set of applications that's beyond a killer app, right? It's actually the value of it itself.
You know, I think there was a seemingly a little bit of a dark cloud that hung over the conversation, because it does require an investment to become operational, and you do have to have some patience. But once you are operational at that foundational level, I guess the message was it's easier to continue to add business driving use cases, and you know, maybe I call that a semantic hump. It's kind of what I gleaned from the conversation. Is that kind of reality the way you see it?
I think it's definitely reality, and I think that's why you had the maturity levels the way that you had specified. So within your level ones, you do have people who do take a leap of faith, right? There is somebody who has to buy into modeling data in its own right before you go to the application, and that's where you're going to actually build a foundation. And I think the sell, as far as what we started with the realization from the business, is that the sell is actually easy after that, right? So I think people have been burned a bit from maybe master data management and traditional data management. People have re-implemented the same data pipelines. How many of you have put in maps or put in social media or put in the same sort of data sources? And you do this time and time and time again. And very little of it is reused. And if we talk about things that are, even a data glossary, we have data stewards, like we do this, right? But none of that is easily reused. A lot of that is manual, right? It's very hard when something changes. It's a whole nother manual process. And so the sell as to, get the buy-in to say, look, I have this already. I've modeled the concepts. Now this data is understandable. People can reuse it for different reasons. And if I want to change it and I want to now think about, I think one of the examples in the sustainability. People want to think about sustainability now. That wasn't something they were looking at. It was very easy to add that label and to propagate it, right? You didn't have to have a whole other big data project again.
So forgive me for my German Shepherd alarm clock going off. The mail was just delivered. I think you touched on what I also heard is probably the key value proposition, right, which is that reusability of data. And if there was one theme at the end of this section of our conversation. It was that those fundamental knowledge graph capabilities, reuse and meaning resolution and all the rest that really do win the day. That's kind of where I walked away feeling pretty good about the direction of that conversation.
For sure. I mean, the value, I think everybody agreed, was upon the self-describing nature that the knowledge graph gives to our data, right? So now I can, because we modeled the data as it's collected, if I want to re-examine it for reuse, if I even want to track back things around the lineage and where it's coming from, that the richness of that metadata that allows the human to now to figure out, does this concept apply, right? So if I'm getting a reading from a temperature pump and I know how it's measured, there's many ways that I can use that, right? But if we actually cast it right away into an application, we lose all that value there. And so the ability to actually capture this in a way that then needs to become democratized for your normal, non-data scientist, non-data geek to look at, your business user, your insurance agent, your doctor, right? I think that's where I'm really excited about this, because they do think in those sorts of conceptual terms, not, the traditional data terms that we look at right now.
All right, so let's shift the conversation from the business narrative, which I think was a good news story, which is it's emerging, to implementation reality. And Lauren, you've agreed to be our victim for kind of the implementation. I'm going to bridge the gap between this business narrative and implementation. And let me kind of pick up from what was maybe underscoring some of what Teresa said just now, which is don't focus on the technology, right? This is, you don't have to sell people a knowledge graph. We're selling people on business value, right? So how do we make that relationship with the business user one that is the driving activity in our conversations?
Well, one way of doing that is about making it simple, hiding the semantics, hiding the complexity, and providing simple lenses into what you've built in your knowledge graph. So hiding the semantics, automating everything you can automate, so that you don't have to involve people in manual tasks that are not prepared for. Try to reduce as much as possible the need for ontologists, and you still need ontologists, you still need a semantic architects, but have them more on the long-term vision and in a role to avoid pitfalls, to avoid issues, and leave the day-to-day operations to in using tools that are simple to use.
It's a little bit of a difficult problem for us, right? Because a lot of the people in the community like to talk about the technology, right? We are focused on breaking new ground, and we want to talk about triples and semantic, engineering and the like. And really, I think the message was talk about data visualization and navigation and query, right? So you probably are experiencing that yourself in the rollout of Knowledge Graph in Johnson & Johnson.
And we were talking earlier about stories, telling better stories to share the value of doing it this way. And one thing that I've run into is how do you talk about knowledge graphs and semantic technologies without using the word graph and the word semantics? Forget about the technology, or hide the technology and focus on what you're trying to accomplish. What will be the real benefits of doing it in a different way?
But if people knew how wonderful and important and magnificent this was, then they would automatically be the same way as we are talking about data concepts and semantics. No, just
those who get it and are willing to get into the technology often become very enthusiastic about it. Yeah.
So I think tell a good story, and a good story does not start with the word ontology or the concept of semantic capability, right? So the second topic, I'm going to say, was kind of built on that, almost a battle for mind share, right? This is, how do we make knowledge graph work with existing infrastructures, right? Because there are existing infrastructures. They're not going to rip and replace them. And we have to blend this. So what do we learn about the ability to blend semantic technology with legacy environments?
Well, here too, you have to make it fit with existing environment, and that's one of the beauty of the approach is that it doesn't have to disturb what's already there. You can automatically, you can set up automatic processes that extract the data, that promote data, that organize the data into a graph without touching what's already in place. And
that abstraction layer, I think you described it as an abstraction layer, which is, I think, was maybe one of the key themes that I heard in the conversation.
Yeah, in that sense, the knowledge graphs are a map linking together the physical infrastructure, the physical data storage, or the data representation. And one thing I've seen is I've seen some investment fatigue or reluctance to invest into yet another platform, because a few years ago we had to invest to do big data, and then we had to invest to do data lakes or data warehouses along the way. And now you're telling me that there wasn't enough. You needed to do that semantic stuff on top of it. And so that's again part of telling the story and showing that yes, you need that to make it fit and make it work better at a larger scale. But it doesn't detract from what you've done before. It just builds on top of it.
But this is the difference between data processing technology orientation and data meaning content orientation. We're now talking about the content side of the equation, right? Poor, humble data is finally getting its due, right?
And it would have been a lot harder to do without the data lakes, without the data warehouses and so on.
I think it was you who described it, that there is a challenge, however, that you have to overcome the relational masses. I think that was a quote that I heard used frequently, right? The skill sets of how to get people to move into the semantic world are not really easy to come by and are not present at the moment in organizations.
Yes, and that's it's not only a skill set, but it's also a mindset. You have to think. You have to sell ideas such as there is no single version of truth. You can build an environment that shows multiple perspectives depending on your needs, and all those source of truth can coexist and be linked together and provide answers. The other thing, the other big idea that helps selling this is to really build things incrementally, and in a way redefine the idea of a quick win or low hanging fruit. It's not about fixing, creating a project that answers a problem immediately or in a very short term, but it's about answering real questions in a way that builds incrementally on top of a common structure. So the key aspect of this is to build that common data structure that will evolve and
I think
ideally evolve into a knowledge graph.
That led into this notion of the importance of the what they call it, the knowledge engineer, right? The person who helps bridge the gap. While we are trying to deliver for business, there is a big, huge requirement for that semantic engineer, knowledge engineer, to help us get that way. I think that was a clear theme that I heard throughout this conversation.
And you need a mix of perspectives. You need to involve the data engineers, the ontologists, but also the business people, data science, machine learning, and all of that having, and again, working on incremental delivery of solution is a good way to get everybody involved and develop that shared understanding.
Yeah, it's a true collaboration process. I'm curious, I know we didn't really talk about this, but I'm curious about the process of getting the full ecosystem to buy in to the changes that are going on. That's been probably part of the organizational journey that we have to pay attention to, how to make that transition across multiple departments.
Yeah, that's something we said a little earlier. Now, I was thinking it's really a chicken and egg problem, because in order to show the value, you need to build it, but you don't get the resources to build it unless you show value. So the third topic that we were talking about was really about the whole data pipeline itself, right? There's managing meaning is different than managing processing. And there are some delusions that exist in the organization that we do have to overcome, right? I think there was some themes about shifting from structuring data to semantic mapping of data, and that was a big concept. Yeah, it is. Like I just said, I touched a little bit of that just before. It's really a shift in mindset that you have to, and fortunately, you can find some people in your organizations that are already primed to thinking in terms of concepts, that have been exposed to this kind of problem. They can become big advocates if you find them and involve them early, because this solves their problems. So like master data management people who have run into those issues of bottom-up versus top-down approaches of building golden records and ideal models of data. This type of technology can help them go over that hurdle that they are getting into, and really create something that will that is not just an ideal exercise of conceptualizing a space, but it's something very practical that answers questions.
So weaning ourselves off that concept of the single version of truth, very difficult, because we've kind of embedded that into our mindset coming from core data management. And now we have kind of a different objective, but it's hard to make that transition in people's minds.
It's hard, but again, storytelling helps there. You can get people to come to that understanding with very simple stories. Like if you think of describing a house in terms of real estate, you're going to use very different relationships and vocabularies than if you're describing it the same house in terms of historical heritage, or in terms of industrial zoning. So having stories like that to demonstrate that you need multiple perspectives, and it's still the same house, but you need to look at it through different lenses, and having a knowledge graph helps capture all those lenses, capture all those decisions about rules around data into a format that you can use to answer questions.
This is all about context, right? And I think I reflected after our session, really there's only 4 things we need for all context, right? Identity, meaning, time, and source. With that, you can construct any reality that exists, and that's what is captured in the knowledge graph. So weaning ourselves from these old concepts are hard, but the capabilities of the graph seem to kind of lead us in that direction. So the final topic on this section was really about governance, right? And I think I heard a big shift in the way we think about governance from our core data management experiences to our knowledge graph world. What did you hear?
Yeah, and to me, the takeaway was that a knowledge graph is really the embodiment of all those governance decisions that you make building a master data model and aligning data, integrating data. Instead of having those decisions be dispersed throughout the whole pipeline, you can physically represent them inside of a structure that at any given time will tell you how you're looking at your data. And when you add on top of that data validation approaches like Shackle, for example, you can really compare what data systems are providing you and what you were expecting, and detect much earlier discrepancies and improve data quality that way.
So before we open it up to see if there's any questions from the audience, let me just ask both of you, if you had to summarize, kind of the takeaway from these two sessions we ran, what was the big lesson? What should people walk away with? What should they remember about this conversation? So Teresa, if you don't mind, on the fly, what are your thoughts about the big message here?
I think now's the time for enterprise knowledge graphs. I think that was the big takeaway. It's the tech has been around for, I would say, over a decade, right, in an academic setting. And if we have both, the vendor maturity and the tooling being easier to use, and it's not, just for academics anymore, it's more enterprise scale. And then on the other side, we have the business saying, we need this. This is how we're going to compete. We're going to change how we do it. So we need to just bring those things together. I think that's our opportunity here.
Lauren, what's the takeaway from your orientation?
For me, it's you don't have to wait for the ideal technology to be out there. Start building it. You can start now incrementally using standards that decouple the data from the technology, and you can change the technology as long as it follows the same standards. You can remove your current platform and apply another one later. It shouldn't matter. So just start doing it now.
Yeah. All right. So let's see if there's any questions for us from the audience. If there are other questions you want to ask these folks, please just type them in. I see one kind of looking at this idea of the difference between multiple truths and multiple perspectives. And I think that's a real key concept. So, Teresa, how do you see the distinction between those two things?
Well, I mean, I think the concepts, like I used an example in the chat, is like there's Teresa, right? Let's say, what's Teresa's temperature right now? And I think there's both multiple truths and perspectives. I usually answer on the multiple perspective side to say there's one truth, and it's actually what you see, like a different view for the different purpose. But I could see that if we're actually going to have data is measured, right, or its data is inputted. So you could imagine that one thermometer reads one thing and the other thermometer reads another thing. There's actually a truth of what my temperature really is, but there's these two sources that gives you a version and a casting of that first. So one is the source of data and the measure that's taken, and the second is the perspective as it's applied. So maybe that's too academic. I do see the chat about revenue and things, but with this information, now you can make the decision for how you want to drive your decisions and how you might want to even report up to regulatory, right? So we want to make the same level of decisions to say, if we're going to use a thermometer, there's the one that I buy from the drugstore, and then the one that's gone through, the medical grade device from the FDA. And so if I'm making a medical decision about Teresa, I better make sure it's using the thermometer that's been medical grade from the FDA, not the one she bought from the drugstore. So the definitions about the source of data will give you a way to actually make sure that your perspective and how you're going to use it is the right one.
So it sounds like it's kind of putting the user back in control, right? So you want to be able to access the data that is relevant for your application. Is that similar, Lauren, to what you're thinking about?
Yeah, not only that, but it captures the full picture. Ideally, it should capture the full picture of all those assumptions, all those decisions that you've made to decide what is the right perspective, what is the right temperature. So it's done in a way that programs can use to not only give you a result, but also explain why. They can give you that reasoning of, I gave you this temperature because it came from this source that was preferred because of that reason. And the knowledge graph should be able to derive that and provide that answer. And if you wanted to ask the knowledge graph everything, you would have also the possibility to view the different perspective and make your own choice.
All right, so let's close it off. There's one question here about user interfaces, right? Which I think is really a question about what's the state of people being able to extract knowledge from the graph, and has it kept up with the underlying technologies that we're doing to develop the graph? So, Lauren, what's your thought? Where are we on user interfaces? Where is that headed? And Teresa will do the same for you. So let's start with you, Lauren.
The user interfaces. One thing we discussed in the other panel is you really need to make it beautiful, appealing, easy to use, and engaging. And one thing I've seen a lot of the time, especially by necessity, the way things are done through more the academic world, is that the user interfaces can be challenging when you look at this kind of technology. So fortunately, those platforms that are coming online are addressing that. It's becoming easier to work with the technologies, but that should really be a big emphasis, because without that, it's going to be very difficult to. Ideally, you need something like an Excel of the equivalent, not the equivalent of what Excel was to spreadsheets. We need something as easy to use for managing semantic data.
So, Teresa, the state of the customer experience, where are we headed?
It could certainly be better. I see a lot of demos that I really don't like, where they want to show me there's a graph, and then they say, look, everyone's seen this demo, like where you could explode the graph, right? You have a little node and you walk and you explode it and you explode it, and you're like, look, now you can see this train of thought. Nobody wants to do that. I don't want to do that, right? So I think what we want to have is things that tell you, like, this is an interesting thing, and here's why it's interesting, and it actually shows you the trajectory. And this is where, again, if we do go from the consumer world and where we do use knowledge graphs, let's say Wikipedia, right, and these are how people want to see it. There's a graph back there. Nobody actually sees it, but it's there. And so I think it could show more explainability, and that's actually what you do get from the graph, or lineage, and understanding which sources and which people even put things in. And that's the richness that we should be seeing. So I think this is a great place for our vendors to actually help, right, to create these tools that make this more user-friendly. And again, not the data scientist, not the data engineer, but your business user.
All right, so we'll let that be the last word. I also wanted to thank you both for stepping in last minute to help us summarize. It was a terrific experience. So thank you all very much, and we will call this session closed.
Thank you.
Thank you.